The night they walked our HOA president out of the clubhouse in handcuffs, you could hear the cheering all the way down by the lake. People had their phones out, some pretending they were just filming the sunset, but you could see it on their faces, that mix of shock and satisfaction when the bully finally trips over her own power trip. And the wild part is, she had no idea that the same man she'd been calling a trigger-happy retiree was the one who bought the land under her precious hiking trail and turned it into his own private hunting reserve. My name is Tom Halpern. I'm a retired engineer. I've spent most of my adult life designing things to keep soldiers safe. Not exactly the resume you picture when you hear dangerous old guy with a gun, but that's the role I got cast in when our HOA decided my grief and my traditions were a threat to their little kingdom. I live in a place called Maple Ridge Estates, quiet subdivision wrapped around a lake, pine trees, oaks, a strip of woods behind my house that backs up to what the county calls a greenbelt, and the HOA calls the Community Nature Trail. And for 30 years, every third Saturday in October, I've done the same thing on the same morning. I open my garage door, let the cold air in, put on a pot of coffee, and I clean my deer rifle. It's a Remington 700 my dad passed down to me, the same one I used to teach my son Daniel to hunt in those woods. He grew up, joined the army as a medic, and never came home from Afghanistan. So that ritual in the garage is not just about oil and steel and routine. It's how I sit with him for a while, how I remember the sound of his laugh when he nailed a perfect shot, how I hold on to the one thing in my life that still feels steady. That morning started like all the others, crisp October air, a bit of mist burning off the lake. The garage door rolled up me at my workbench with the smell of solvent and gun oil hanging in the air, the weight of the rifle in my hands like an old friend. And then I heard tires on gravel, that slow crunch that tells you a car is not just passing by, it's stopping in front of your house. I looked up and saw her standing at the end of my driveway holding a clipboard like a badge. Marjorie Lance, the HOA's self-appointed wildlife preservation officer, severe haircut, expensive athleisure outfit, that tight little mouth that always looked like she just smelled something she didn't approve of. I gave her a polite nod, went back to wiping down the barrel. Figured maybe she was dropping off some newsletter about bird feeders. Instead, she raised her phone, pointed it straight at me, and I heard the click of a photo. Then she scribbled furiously on her clipboard, tore a sheet off with way more drama than necessary, and marched up the driveway like she owned the pavement. "Mr. Halpern," she said, voice dripping fake authority. "This is a violation notice." I didn't take it, just kept my hand on the rifle stock and asked violation for what exactly, Marjorie. She pointed at the rifle like it was a crime scene. Per HOA Regulation 17 subsection C, the open display of firearms and related hunting paraphernalia in view of HOA-managed land constitutes intimidating behavior and illegal hunting activity on HOA-controlled property. That will be a $250 fine payable within 15 days to avoid late fees. She had it memorized like she'd been practicing in the mirror. I glanced past her at the woods behind my house, the same strip of trees Daniel and I used to walk, the same line the county plat clearly marked as Greenbelt. "Those woods aren't HOA land," I said, keeping my voice even. "They're county Greenbelt, always have been. I'm in my own garage on my own property cleaning a rifle I have the right to own." She gave me that condescending little smile you only see on people who've never been told no. "The board considers the visual corridor part of the community's managed territory," she said. Like that meant something in English. "Your activities are visible from the community hiking trail. We have to think about safety, Tom." Then she tucked the violation slip under my windshield wiper, spun on her heel, and walked away like she'd just saved the neighborhood from a terrorist. It wasn't the money that got to me. It was how casual she was about stepping into this quiet moment I had with my son's memory and turning it into a performance on her power stage. But I'm an engineer by training, an old soldier by habit. And the first instinct in both jobs is the same: know your terrain before you fight. So I did what I've always done when something doesn't sit right. I gathered my maps. 2 days later, I walked into the HOA's little office off the clubhouse, sad fake plant in the corner printer that sounded like it was dying, and Marjorie sitting behind a particle board desk, looking like she was chairing a Senate hearing. I laid out my property survey from when I bought the house, a county plat of the subdivision, and a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. "Look," I said, pointing, "my property line runs 50 yards into the woods beyond that. It's county land, not HOA land." I was inside my garage. "Your fine is invalid." She didn't even glance down, just leaned back in her chair and let out this little sigh. "We have newer maps," she said. "Besides, those woods might be getting rezoned soon. Big plans." Until then, your refusal to comply is being noted. She tapped something into her computer like she was entering my sentence. Your fine is now $500 and I'm recommending suspension of your lake access until it's paid. That's when I understood this wasn't about land or safety or a rifle. It was about control, plain and simple. Still, I put my name on the list to speak at the next board meeting because some stubborn, hopeful part of me thought surely the rest of the board would be more reasonable. The night of the meeting, I walked into the clubhouse meeting room with my maps rolled under my arm. 5 board members up front at a folding table, maybe half a dozen neighbors in chairs, and Marjorie sitting to the side looking smug. I unrolled the maps, showed the property lines, explained where the county greenbelt started, told them calmly I was on my land, that the fine wasn't valid. When I finished the board, President, a sleepy guy named Gordon, didn't look at the maps, he looked at Marjorie. She sighed and turned to address the room like I wasn't even there. We cannot have residents deciding which rules they want to follow, she said. We have regulations to keep everyone safe and to preserve property values, not to cater to the hobbies of a trigger-happy retiree. A couple people actually chuckled at that line. Trigger-happy. You know that feeling when a word slices through every defense you've built and goes straight to the sorest spot in you? Yeah, that happened. I spent my career making things safer. I taught my son to respect the weight of a trigger. He died wearing a uniform this country gave him, and now in a room with my neighbors, I'm a punchline. The board didn't even pretend to deliberate. 5-0 fine, upheld, lake access suspended. I rolled up my maps, walked out without another word, got in my truck, drove to the edge of my lawn where it meets the trees and just stood there watching the sun go down through the same branches my son and I had walked under. In that quiet, the anger and humiliation hardened into something colder. You picked the wrong man's peace, I said out loud to nobody. And that's when the war started for me, even if it didn't look like it on paper yet. The next few weeks, the harassment turned up like someone kept twisting a dial. Certified letters started arriving, thick envelopes full of legal threats about liens on my property if I didn't pay another letter demanding a property inspection to make sure my yard was free of wildlife attractants, as if a bird feeder was a crime scene. And then one afternoon, an HOA crew showed up and hammered a big metal sign into the ground right where the trail meets my yard. No firearms, no hunting violators will be prosecuted. Placed at the perfect angle so that if I looked out my kitchen window, I couldn't miss it a billboard for my own public shaming. The social side started too. Neighbors who used to wave from their cars suddenly stared straight ahead at the grocery store. A couple I'd known for years turned their cart down another aisle when they saw me, and the whole time I hadn't fired a shot, hadn't broken a law, I'd just refused to bow to a bogus fine. My daughter Ellie drove down one weekend. She's a school counselor. Heart too big for her own good. She walked in, saw the stack of HOA letters on my counter and that ugly sign outside, and I watched worry take over her whole face. "Dad, what is all this?" she asked. I told her about the garage, the violation, the meeting. I told her about the trigger-happy line about the lake access, and she listened and then said what any rational person would say. Just pay it. It's $500. It's not worth them putting a lien on the house. This is the place you and Mom built. You're supposed to leave it to me and Noah one day. You can't risk it. Over pride. I love my daughter, but she didn't get it. It's not about money. I said they walked into my garage, into my grief, and turned it into a show. They dragged Daniel's memory into that room and laughed at it. Some things you can't just write a check for and move on. We argued in that soft way families do when they're both scared and both stubborn. She left that evening frustrated and scared, and I sat at my kitchen table staring at the fine notice like maybe I was the one out of line. A couple days later, there was a knock on the door, and when I opened it, my neighbor 3 houses down, Roy Bixler, was standing there with a 6-pack in his hand. Roy is a retired plumber and a vet from another war, not a talkative man. He walked past me without asking, set the beer on the counter, cracked 2 open, and slid one toward me. "Heard you pissed off the Queen," he grumbled. As we sat there, he told me how Marjorie had fined him $300 because his garden hose wasn't coiled in a perfect circle right after his wife died, and he could barely get out of bed. Then Sarah from across the street showed up with a plate of still-warm brownies and told us how Marjorie tried to have her old beagle declared vicious because he barked at her poodle, and one by one a few more neighbors trickled in, each with a story about unapproved mulch, the wrong shade of paint, trash cans out an hour too late, always the same pattern, always the same name on the letterhead. Listening to them, the fight inside me turned from personal rage to something bigger. This wasn't just me and my rifle. It was a woman who'd figured out she could use rules as a weapon against anyone who was too tired or too alone to push back. And for the first time, I thought, okay, this isn't just my hill, this is our hill. After they left, I went out to my workshop, dragged out an old footlocker from my Army engineering days. Inside were rolled up survey maps, topo charts, and my old Trimble GPS unit, the same kind we used overseas to lay out bases down to the inch. And if there's one thing I trust more than HOA feelings, it's hard numbers on a map. I spread my old maps out, pulled up the county assessor website, started cross-referencing parcel numbers, property lines, easements, all the boring stuff most people never notice. And then I saw it, the parcel number listed for the strip of land with the HOA's community hiking trail. On my survey map, didn't match the number they used on their pretty brochures, tiny discrepancy, easy to miss if you're not looking, but my gut lit up. I drove to the county records office, a fluorescent-lit basement that smells like paper and dust, spent 3 nights at a wooden table pulling old deeds and tax ledgers. And on the 3rd night, the clerk on duty, a tired woman named Brenda, slid a thin file over to me with a little knowing smile. Inside was a tax default notice for that exact parcel, years of unpaid property taxes, the county getting ready to auction it off in a couple weeks to recoup the bill starting bid just over $8,000, owner of Record Summit County, not Maple Ridge Estates, HOA. The land my HOA queen had been treating like her personal kingdom wasn't even hers. I went home, liquidated a small stock fund I'd been saving for a rainy day, and quietly registered a little shell company, Halpern Wildlife Reserve, LLC. Then I placed a bid on that forgotten 20 acres of woods, including every inch of their hiking trail. While I waited to see if my bid stuck, I played the game. I paid the $500 fine, took down the bird feeder, acted like a man who'd been beaten into compliance. Marjorie sent a smug email to the whole community about how the Halpern issue has been resolved through cooperation, and while she was taking her victory lap, I was checking my inbox for one specific subject line. When the winning bid confirmation, Summit County tax auction email finally popped up, I just sat there staring at the screen for a second. Then I looked out my window at the ugly no hunting sign and the trees behind it and thought, you fine me for hunting near land you don't even own. I didn't run straight to a microphone. Instead, I rented a brush hog, went out to my back line, and started clearing the overgrown edge of my original lot where it now met my new parcel. It felt good, honest work, sweat and fuel and sawdust, reclaiming something that had always felt like mine anyway. 3 days in, I heard the whine of a golf cart engine and looked up to see Marjorie coming in, hotboard Vice President Gordon riding shotgun with a clipboard. She slammed to a stop at the edge of my lawn, jumped out, and pointed at the brush I'd cleared. "What do you think you're doing?" she practically screamed. "This is designated community green space. You are destroying association property." I shut off the machine, pulled off my gloves, and said calmly, "I'm clearing brush on my property, Marjorie. I suggest you get back on the path before you cross a line you can't uncross." She stomped right up to the boundary, close enough that I could see the sweat starting at her hairline. "This is your final warning, Tom," she said, motioning to Gordon, who had his phone out filming. "You are in violation of multiple bylaws, and until you issue a formal public apology to this board for your disruptive behavior, your lake access is banned indefinitely." She thought she was dropping the hammer, but what she really did was hit the last nerve I had left. The lake was where my wife had loved to sit at sunset, where I took my grandson to fish, and now she was trying to take that too. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I just looked her in the eye until she started to fidget, turned around, got in my truck, and drove away. She thought that silence meant she'd won. It meant I was done playing defense. 2 days later, flyers went up on every mailbox announcing an emergency community safety meeting at the clubhouse, subject resident behavior near the trail. I didn't go, but Roy did. He came over afterward, dropped into a chair, and said Marjorie had stood up there telling everyone I was running military-style operations at the edge of the woods, painting me as some unstable vet with a stash of weapons, talking about how she feared for the children using the trail, and by the end the board had voted unanimously to seek a restraining order to keep me 50 feet away from any HOA common area, including the land I had just legally bought. Half the neighborhood bought the story, whispering, shutting doors, steering their kids away when I walked by. The other half kept their heads down but left quiet signs of support. A nod from the mailman, a thermos on my porch with a note that said, "For the good fight." When Ellie called after hearing about the restraining order, rumors she was crying, "Dad, they're telling people you're dangerous. Sell the house, please. We'll find you a place closer to us. This is not worth losing everything." And then she said the part that hurt the most. Daniel wouldn't want you to go down over this." After I hung up, I came as close as I ever did to folding. I sat alone in my dark kitchen, the original $500 fine notice on the table under the ugly yellow light, thinking about how that one piece of paper had turned into a war that was hurting my daughter, splitting my neighborhood, and threatening my home. I stared at it long enough that the print blurred, and for a minute I thought, maybe I am just a stubborn old fool who doesn't know when to quit. Then there was another knock on the door, and there was Roy again with another six-pack. He sat down, handed me a bottle, stared out the window at the trailhead sign, and said in that slow drawl of his, "You ever notice those trail signs don't line up with the old county stakes? They're off by a good 20 or 30 feet. That one sentence snapped everything back into focus for me. I went out to my garage, grabbed my Trimble GPS unit and a bundle of bright orange survey stakes, and told him, "Come on, let's go for a walk." We started at the known marker on my lot, set the baseline, and walked the property line between my land and the parcel I'd just bought every 10 yards. He hammered in a stake, and those orange flags made a straight glowing line through the trees that marched right past where the HOA had posted their trail signs, and kept going. When we reached the end of that line, the GPS beeped and we were standing dead center under the HOA's pride and joy, the Nature Walk Pavilion with its roof benches, concrete slab, and a shiny plaque listing the board members who'd dedicated it to the community 5 years earlier. According to the county, every nail and every bag of concrete sat a full 40 feet inside my property line. The pavilion, the trail, the heart of their little empire, was built on land they had never owned. From there, the rest moved pretty fast. I went back to the courthouse, made sure my LLC and deed were airtight, then drove to the State Fish and Wildlife Office and applied for the permits to designate my land as a private controlled hunting reserve, the kind ranchers use to manage deer populations, submitted survey maps and a land management plan, and within a week I had state certificates saying the Halpern Wildlife Reserve was legitimate. I made copies, put them in a folder, and called Brenda at the county to ask if she'd be willing to attend the next HOA meeting in case anyone questioned the deed. She agreed. On the night of that board meeting, the room was packed, extra folding chairs, people standing in back, even a local news crew with a camera, and sure enough, the restraining order against me was on the agenda. Marjorie did her usual performance about how she'd acted to neutralize a threat to community harmony. The reporter asked if she had proof of her claims, and she smiled that sad, practiced smile and said, "For the sake of our children, yes." Before she could keep going, I raised my hand. "The board recognizes Mr. Halpern," Gordon muttered like he was announcing a root canal. I walked to the front, not to the tiny podium they reserve for residents, but to the board table, unrolled my deed, and slid it in front of Marjorie. "You fined me for hunting on so-called HOA land," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Problem is that land isn't yours, it's mine." She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That's ridiculous. That's obviously fake. Gordon, call the sheriff. This is fraud," she snapped. And that's when Brenda stepped forward from the back, held up her county ID, and said, "I can personally verify that deed was recorded last week. Parcel 7B4 belongs to Halpern Wildlife Reserve, LLC." You could feel the whole room shift. I unrolled my survey overlay, traced the property line, and said, "As of right now, I'm closing all public access to my property. Every HOA sign, bench, trash can, and structure on my land needs to be removed within 30 days. After that, anything left will be treated as trespassing." The room erupted, people shouting, some at me, more at the board. Gordon looked like he wanted to sink through the floor, and Marjorie went from red to pale to something that didn't have a name. She leaned toward me and hissed, "You think this is over? This isn't over, not by a long shot," and stormed out. Problem was, she was too angry to think straight after that. In the days that followed, anonymous posts popped up on the neighborhood forum, accusing me of poaching, of setting illegal wire snares near the trail where kids walked, and then a formal complaint got filed with State Fish and Wildlife claiming I was breaking hunting laws on my new reserve, and even if the truth would eventually clear me, the accusation alone could have wrecked everything. What she didn't know is that before I was an engineer, I'd done my share of counterintelligence work, and if there's one thing you learn in that line of work, it's you don't just defend yourself against lies, you set up your own eyes on the field. I went out and bought 4 high-definition motion-activated trail cameras. That night, I walked my property line and mounted them where someone sneaking in from the subdivision would slip across my boundary to plant evidence, not where a poacher would hide, but where a coward would creep in thinking they were clever. 3 nights of raccoons and deer went by. Then on the 4th night, my phone buzzed at 2 in the morning. Motion alert, I opened the feed and there she was, hood up, gloves on, stepping across my line, kneeling at the base of a tree, pulling a coil of wire from her bag, setting a snare and scattering bait. Then her hood slipped back, and even in infrared there was no mistaking her face. She took a picture of her own handiwork and scurried back toward the subdivision, thinking she was about to deliver the final blow. The HOA's annual election meeting was that weekend, same room, bigger crowd, same news crew, and Marjorie was at the podium giving a whole speech about vigilance and dangerous elements, and how sometimes leadership means making hard choices, building up to her grand finale where she would unveil her proof. The reporter asked if she had evidence. She said, "I wish it hadn't come to this." But yes, and that was my moment. "Before you show your pictures, Marjorie," I called out, "I've got a short video I think everyone here should see. They killed the lights." I plugged my phone into the projector, hit play, and we all watched together as the hooded figure on the screen crept through my trees, knelt, set the snare, scattered the bait, and then revealed her own face when the hood slipped. "You could feel the air get sucked out of the room," somebody shouted. "Oh my God!" Gordon put his head in his hands like he was trying to disappear. The reporter swung his camera from the screen to Marjorie, who stood frozen at the podium. Two sheriff's deputies I'd invited that morning stepped forward. One of them said calmly, "Ma'am, I think you need to come with us." And as they walked her out past the rows of neighbors, the room broke into applause, not polite clapping, but the relieved kind of noise a community makes when a weight is finally lifted. As she passed me, her face streaked with tears and rage. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I just said quietly, "No one's above their own rules," and let her keep walking. The rest is cleanup and paperwork. The old board resigned, a new one got voted in with Roy as president. They rescinded a bunch of bogus fines. We worked out a proper easement so people could still walk a marked trail along the edge of my land. And we turned that illegal pavilion into something better, a veterans memorial shelter dedicated to people like my son, who know what it really means to defend their ground. A few weeks later, Ellie came back. We walked to the gate of my reserve together, and I screwed a small brass plaque into the post with Daniel's name on it, "Who hunted with honor." She put her hand on my shoulder and said, "He'd be proud of you, Dad." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. I didn't set out to be the guy who took down an HOA. I just wanted to be left alone to clean my rifle in peace and remember my son. But when you push a quiet man too far, you wake up all the parts of him that know how to hold a line. So now, I'm curious what you think. Did I do the right thing, or did I go too far buying that land and turning their own rules against them? Have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen or a boss who thought a clipboard made them king? Tell me in the comments whose side you're on, what you would have done in my place, and if you've got a story of your own about fighting back when someone abused their little bit of power, I want to hear it.